Ever since I was 12 years old, I've been a hunter. When I was little, my dad used to take me out every season. He taught me everything I know. And even though he's too old to go out anymore, I still do. I used to have a few friends I'd head out with, but these days they've all got their own lives to worry about. Wives, kids, jobs, and commitments that eat up their time. Me? I'm simple. I do what I need to do, but I don't let that get in the way of doing what I love. It's why I started hunting alone. My game of choice used to be bear. The season spans from spring until fall, which meant that I could go out just about any time. The meat is damn good too if you know how to cook it. I know that hunting bears of all things might sound a little dangerous, but in most of my experience, bears aren't all that scary. They aren't much more dangerous than deer or elk, and besides, you're the one with the gun, not the bear. Unless they're protecting cubs, they'd rather run. Even if they are looking for a fight, a face full of buckshot usually makes them think twice. I'd been hunting bears for about 20 years now, and I've only had one encounter that went bad. Just one. Looking back, I still don't fully understand exactly what happened that day, but it's been enough to turn me off of bears. Hell, after what happened, I've considered hanging up my gun for good. It was a rainy weekend in mid-September, and I headed up to one of my usual spots where I knew I'd probably find some good game. I'd found black bears in that area before, so I knew they'd pass through often. The sight of fresh droppings and markings on the trees told me that someone had staked that land as their territory. That was perfect for me. I set up my remote collar and found a spot downwind where I'd be nice and out of sight. Then I just waited. It was still early dawn, the perfect time to catch a bear. I didn't have to wait all that long before I caught a glimpse of my prey either. He was a big bastard that was hard to see amongst the foliage. He was a good 60 yards away when I spotted him, but he'd heard my collar and come to investigate. I lined up my shot on him, waiting for a good line of sight on his sweet spot, about 8 inches behind the shoulder. I waited for him to close the distance, 50 yards, 40, 30. He meandered closer and closer as I lined up my shot. He was about 10 yards away by the time I actually pulled the trigger. The explosion from the barrel of my shotgun startled some nearby birds, but the bear didn't have much time to react before I hit him. I saw his body jerk back from the impact, and I expected him to turn tail and bolt for safety before he finally collapsed, just like every other bear had before him. This one held its ground, though. His limbs shifted uneasily beneath his weight, and his head turned towards me. For a moment, I felt a surreal spike of panic before raising my gun to take a second shot. I was aiming for the sweet spot, but as my finger tightened on the trigger, the bear moved again. The buckshot went right into its face, sending a spray of blood onto the ground. The bear should have reacted. It should have recoiled. Even if I'd missed, the sound should have startled it, but this bear only stood there, staring blankly at me. This didn't make any sense. The damn thing should have been dead or dying, but instead it just seemed mildly annoyed. I hastily loaded another 2 shells into my gun before taking aim for a third shot. As I lined it up, I saw the bear starting to move towards me. Its gait was lumbering as it picked up speed. I fired my shotgun a third time, but it didn't do anything more than it had the last time. The bear was wounded, that much was obvious. I could see blood matting its fur and chunks of skin torn away from its face, but the goddamn thing didn't slow its charge. It just bolted for me, and by the time it occurred to me to run, it was too late. I only barely stumbled out of the way as the bear crashed through the brush I'd been hiding in and pounced on the space where I'd been. I broke into a run, trying to put some distance between myself and the wounded animal. From the corner of my eye, I could see it had already begun to give chase. I didn't know what to do. This made no sense. No bear should have been acting like that. I didn't know what was wrong with it, and at that moment, I was too scared to think about it. At that moment, all I could think to do was run. I wasn't faster than the bear, though. It charged right for me, seemingly unaware of its wounds, and I didn't make it far before its weight slammed into me. The world seemed to spin around. I hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of me, and barely had a chance to roll onto my back before I felt the white, hot pain of teeth in my shoulder. I screamed as the bear tore at me. Its head jerked from side to side, and I could feel my bones cracking under the force of its bite. With my free hand, I struggled to grab my shotgun and uselessly beat it against the head of the bear. Its grip on my arm loosened slightly, and my blood dripped from its jaws as its maw moved over my face. I could smell its rotten breath with each hot exhale. I only had a moment to act, and at that moment nothing else mattered. Not the pain of my ruined shoulder, not the fear of horrible death I was staring down. All I could think about was my shotgun. With what strength I could muster, I jammed the barrel against the beast's neck and pulled the trigger. A splatter of fresh blood sprayed across my face. The sound of the blast left a ringing in my ears, and the recoil sent fresh agony through my wounded arm. For a moment, the world went white, and I'm not sure just how much time had passed between when I fired the gun and when I was able to move again. I know that the bear had finally shrank back, pulling away from me. It shook its head as if trying to clear it, and I noticed something dangling from its jaw. At first, I was sure it had ripped off my arm while I'd been stunned, but as my blurring vision came back into focus, I instead realized that the bear had nothing in its jaws. That was its jaw. It hung uselessly from the creature's head by a few strands of muscle, and the bear only seemed mildly annoyed at best by it. It pawed uselessly at its nearly severed jaw before ripping the bone away from it. Its head twisted to look back at me. I could see patches of bone through its tattered hide. Both of its eyes were missing. The bear should have been dead by now. It should have been long dead. But in its empty sockets, I could see something else. Something beyond the blood-flecked darkness. I still can't quite describe it, but I felt as if it was still looking at me. I tried to pull myself away from the creature. My body ached. My arm was bleeding heavily. I don't know how I managed to pick myself up, but somehow I did. I collapsed after just a few steps and looked back to see the bear watching me intently through its empty eye sockets. It seemed to almost ponder me for a moment, although what was going through its head I can't say. I tried to crawl away from it, knowing that it was useless. Knowing that the creature, whatever it was, would be on top of me soon enough to finish what it had started. Instead, when I looked back, I could see it turning away, trudging off into the brush. Whether it was satisfied, afraid, or simply bored, I can't say. But the bear walked with no sense of urgency. It moved as if it hadn't been mortally wounded, and didn't even bother to look back at me as it left me to die in the dirt. I propped myself up against a tree, breathing heavily and waiting for it to come back. It never did. It let me live. That much was clear. I don't know why. Maybe I'd proved to be more trouble than what I was worth. Maybe I passed some sort of test of what had happened. I know that I sure as hell didn't beat it, though. And I didn't scare it off. It let me live. If you can call my current state living, anyhow. I was too weak and disoriented to make it back out of the woods, and during the skirmish I'd lost my sense of direction. I was sure I wasn't ever going to go home again. That I was either going to die out in the woods, or that bear would come back to finish what it started. I probably would have died out there if someone else hadn't found me, dehydrated and with an infected wound on my arm. It was another hunter, no one I know. And by the time they came across me, I was too delirious to even remember what they looked like. I had to be airlifted to the hospital. It was the only way to save my life. They couldn't save my arm, though. The infection had gone too far for that. Life without an arm took some getting used to, but over the years I've found a way to manage. I don't hunt bear anymore, and I don't hunt alone. I don't know if what I encountered that day was some sort of fluke, or even if what I shot actually was a bear. I don't want to tempt fate either. Some nights, I hear movement outside my house. The sound of something sniffing around my windows. It could just be my imagination, but I'm sure that it's a bear. No, not a bear. The bear. Sometimes I wonder if it's checking up on me, seeing if I'm ready to challenge it again. Or maybe it just wants to finish what it started. Now that it's figured out I didn't die in the dirt like it wanted me to. I really don't know. Maybe it is just my imagination. Maybe. But I don't think it is.